All right, welcome back. This is part 2 of the savings plans and investments section. And this part now is going to focus on investments. I wanted to go over some types of investments, and these some might sound familiar and some of them might not be. But here are some 3 basic types of investments. One is called like a CD, which is a cash investment. This includes money you deposit into a bank account, certificate of deposit, but also U.S. Treasury bills. Cash investments generally will earn interest. You also have something called a bond. This represents a promise of future cash. So what happens is bonds are usually issued by either the government or a corporation, and the issuer pays a simple interest as opposed to compound interest and promises to pay back your initial investment plus interest. So you buy the bond, and then after so many years, it will what we call mature, and now you've earned interest on it. And the interest is just each year, so you can always check if you have a bond to see how much you've accrued. But it takes a certain amount of years. Some take now 20 years to mature. So it depends on the investment you're buying, the type of bond. And then we have stocks, which I know a lot of people are probably familiar with that word. It gives you a share of ownership in a company. So you invest by purchasing shares of the stock, and then the only way to get your money out is to sell the stock. And if you know about stocks, stock prices change with time. They change daily even. The sale may give you either a gain or a loss on your original investment. So it is a risk for investments, but sometimes it does work out. So it's up to you, and I would imagine you would do some research, but I also would recommend working with a financial advisor if you plan on investing in some stocks. All right, let's start with bonds. 3 main characteristics here. You have something, when you buy a bond, there's 3 terms. You have the face value. That is the price you must pay the issuer to buy at the time it is issued. So that is the price. So the face value is the price you're paying. Then you have what's called the coupon rate of the bond. And that is the simple interest rate that the issuer promises to pay. So the coupon rate is your interest rate. Then you have the maturity date of the bond. That is the date on which the issuer promises to repay the face value of the bond. All right. So let's go over some questions on here. Oh, actually, first let me go over the current yield of a bond because we're actually going to do some problems on that. If you want to know the current yield of a bond, what you're going to do, and this is the formula, you're going to take the annual interest payment and divide that was a horrible line, by the current price of the bond. Okay? Because remember, the price of the bond changes. It has a maturity date, but as the years go by, there's going to be a current price that you can check on each time. So if you want the current yield of a bond, you're going to take the annual interest rate divided by the current price of the bond. All right, so given that information, let's go down here to our first example. So the closing price of a U.S. Treasury bond with a face value of 1,000 is quoted as 105.97 points for a current yield of 3.7%. If you buy this bond, how much annual interest will you receive? All right, so let's go over a few things on this. We have the face value. So I'm going to kind of explain a few things. The 105.97 points. Let me explain what that means. So the 105.7 points, what that means, oops, let me dot my I so it looks like, kind of like points, almost looks like an A. But the points means 105.97% of the $1,000. So when you see points, what that means, that is the percent of the face value amount. In this particular problem, that's going to be 105.97% of the 1,000. And what you're going to do then is you're going to take that, well, let's turn it into a decimal. So let's keep going, but we're going to do some math. So we're going to take one, because remember, we're turning this into a decimal. So that's going to be 1.0597 times the 1,000. And what that gives us is 1,000. Here we go, 59. Make sure I have room here, and 70 cents, just made it. What that is, and let me just kind of label that. Okay, so what that is up here, and I'm just going to put an arrow, so I want to make sure I have room for everything. This is the current price of the bond. So when you're given the points and the face value, and you want to know the current price of the bond, then you're just going to take that percent, the points, turn it into a decimal, and multiply it by the current face value. This is going to give us the current price of the bond. Because remember, you're earning interest. All right, so we needed that because what we're trying to find here is we're going to use our formula for the current yield of a bond. So let me just switch colors because we're kind of doing, this was kind of step one, we'll say, because we do want to find the current price of the bond. Now we want to use current yield. You have the formula right above you in the video. So current yield is your annual interest rate, right? Divided by the current price of the bond. And we know the current yield because it gave it to us. The current yield, here, let me underline it here in the problem. The current yield is right here. It's 3.7%. But this is, we're doing algebra. So let's change that to a decimal. So 0.037 equals, now use the formula. What is the annual interest payment? Well, that's what we're trying to find, right? That's what it asked us. How much annual interest will you receive? We don't know, so we'll just call that X. We know the current price of the bond because we just solved that in step one. Okay, so here's our problem. We're taking the current yield, which is it already gave it to us. The current yield is 3.7%, equals annual interest rate or interest payment, which we don't know what that is, divided by. Now we have to solve for X. This one's a little different than all the problems we've been doing because notice you're doing X divided by the number. So remember in algebra, when you are trying to solve for X, but you're dividing, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to multiply both sides. Oops, I don't have a lot of room. So we're going to multiply. I'll just put it here, right there. Good thing we have all these different colors. Okay, so we're going to multiply the 0.037 times the current price of the bond. All right, so take the 0.037 times the current price of the bond, and it will just round to the nearest penny. So I'm seeing $39.21. That is what your annual interest payment will be with that. All right, so that's what we have here, $39.21. Now, if you need to watch the problem again, just rewind the video and watch the example again. Because I know when you first do this, if this is very new to you, don't panic if you don't get it the first time around. That is very normal, especially in math. Your brain kind of has to, right, assimilate all of this information. And so feel free to pause, go back and watch some of these again. All right, another example. With this one, we have a $1,000 treasury bond that has a coupon rate of 4.4% that has a market value of $8.25. Find the current yield of the bond. Here's the thing with these problems. You have to figure out what all the variables are. Going back to the first one, in order to get the current price of the bond, we had to take the points. Let's see if I can get that to show you with my cursor. You have to take the points, turn it into a percent, turn the percent into a decimal, and then multiply it by the face value. So we had to do some manipulation with this problem so we could get all of the variables we needed. Same with this one. So let's talk about what we have. We have a $1,000 treasury bond. Now that's the face value. That's what you paid for that. We have the coupon rate of 4.4%. So to find the annual interest payment, so see this one, we have different things we're trying to find. What we're trying to find in this particular problem is the current yield of the bond. So that means I need the annual interest payment and I need the current price of the bond. Because let's go back to the problem real quick. We want to find, right? We want to find this, the current yield of the bond. Well, that means I need to know these two things. So let's go down. Well, we actually have both of those, believe it or not, with the information given. If we want to find out what the annual interest payment is, we take the coupon rate. Because remember, if you go back to the definitions of the table I showed you, the coupon rate is your simple interest rate. This is your face value. All right, so the annual interest payment is $1,000 times the 4.4%, but as a decimal. So times 0.044. That's going to give you exactly $44. Okay, that is the annual interest payment. But now we need to find out what is the current price of the bond. Well, that's the market value right here. That's the market value. So that is the current price. Okay, when you see market value, that's what it currently is the priced at. Okay, so then to find the current yield, we're going to take, and I'm just going right back here to the formula. It's the annual interest payment divided by the current price of the bond. Here, the annual interest payment we said is $44. And then divided that by the current price, which is $8.25. So divide those two numbers, and we'll round 3 places or however far. So we'll do 3 places. We get 0.053. If we need to write that as a percent, we just multiply that by 100 and we get 5.3%. Okay, so that is how you would find the current yield of the bond. And these two problems should help you because, again, it's showing you different ways to calculate what we need to calculate, but also different wording and different variables that were given. Okay, now we're going to totally switch gears and we're going to go to stocks. Okay, stocks. With stocks, there's a couple things that we can calculate. One, it's called the total return on your stock. What is your total return? The formula is A minus P divided by P, but let's talk about what those variables are. P is what the original purchase price, so whatever you originally paid for that stock. A is the accumulated balance, right? The accumulated balance, so it's the sale price of the stock minus the commission. If you did this, usually you're going to pay a commission if you did this through a financial advisor or it's different accounts. But that's what your A is. So it's what you basically make, right? And so we're talking about your total return. Then you have something called the earnings per share. This is the share price divided by the P to E ratio. Okay, let me explain what the P to E ratio is. It's the price to earnings ratio. Okay, so let me just kind of put that here. It's the price to earnings ratio. It measures a company's share price relative to its earnings per share. Basically, it helps assess relative value of a company's stocks. Okay, so that's what the P to E ratio is. And let's do a little example here we're going to first look at total return, and then we'll do one with earnings per share. So here's our example. Suppose you bought XYZ stock. 1 year ago for $8.60 per share, and you sell it at $10.25. You also pay a commission of 50 cents per share on your sale. What is the total return on your investment? Well, first we have to label what is P. P is what you initially paid for the stock. All right, well, that's the $8.60. What is A? A is how much the stock sold for minus the commission, which is 50 cents. All right, this is what your A is. So your A is $9.75. Now we can use the formula. I'm just going to jump back here so you can see it. Total return is A minus P. Actually, I'll just write it here. A minus P, right? So you're going back up here, A minus P divided by P. Oops, there we go. Well, let's just plug in our numbers then. So A minus P divided by P. And that you can just do right on your calculator. So you just subtract first in the numerator, then take that answer and divide it by the number in the denominator. Now, total return, just so you know, is a percent. So first, let's round to 3 places. Oops, I was putting dollar amount. That was my error. Let me just erase that. I'm jumping ahead. All right, so we're going to do point, and I see on my calculator 0.134, but we're going to write that as a percent, which means you multiply that by 100, and our total return rate is a 13.4%. Okay, that one wasn't too bad. Now let's try one where we're looking at a P to E ratio, and let's do some discussion with this. First, let's start off with company XYZ closed at $54, and that's going to bug me with that space. All right, $54.52 per share with a P to E ratio of 1912. How much were the earnings per share? Let's go back up here, right here. Earnings per share is the share price divided by the P to E ratio. All right? Well, we have the share price, so that's going to be $54.52 divided by the P to E ratio, which is the 19.12. Divide that, and we round to the nearest penny because this is a dollar amount. We should see about $2.85. So that would be the earnings per share. But now let's go to question B, because this is a good question when we're doing some comparison. Does the stock seem overpriced, underpriced, or about right, given that the historical P to E ratio is 12 to 14? So let me kind of explain how this works. If the stock's P to E ratio is less than the historical average, then the stock would seem underpriced. If the stock's P to E ratio is greater than the historical average, then the stock would seem overpriced. Okay, that's what we're looking at. And if it's right where it is, then it's about right. So again, just to repeat real quick, if the P to E ratio is less than the historical average, then your stock is underpriced. If it's over the historical average, then it's overpriced. So now let's see what we're looking at. It says that the P to E ratio is 19.12. So I'm going back up here, okay, to where they were telling us what the P to E ratio was. Let me just go down a little bit so we can see that. The P to E ratio is 19.12. But historically, it's 12 to 14, okay? Let me just put it this way. So the 19.12 is greater than the historical average. Okay? Thus, we would say the stock seems overpriced. So this is a good way to look to see, should I purchase now? Should I sell now? By looking also at a comparison of the P to E ratio, P to E ratio, and seeing if the stock is overpriced, underpriced, or just about right. All right, that actually ends part 2 of our savings and investment section. Next, we'll be looking at basic loans. We're going to look at loan payments, credit cards, mortgages, and all that fun topics.